Welcome back to Understanding VC. I'm your host Rahul. Today, my guest is Chandan Deep. Chandan is a VP of Strategy and Operations at B Capital Group, a multi stage global investment firm with 6.3 billion in assets under management across multiple funds. The firm focuses on seed to late stage venture growth investments, primarily in the enterprise, financial technology, and healthcare sectors. And prior to B Capital, she launched and grew Twitter's commercial operations in emerging markets for Asia Pacific and also spent several years in management consulting with Accenture and the Boston Consulting Group. Now let's talk to her. Hi, Chandan. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, Rahul, lovely way to end the week. Looking forward to the weekend and chatting with you.
Yeah, I was looking at your LinkedIn a while back, and then I noticed that you're like a number one in economics and finance.
Oh.
It's good. Yeah,
I didn't know you scroll right to the bottom. I should probably remove that from my LinkedIn.
yeah. So why economics and finance?
It's interesting. At that time, while growing up, so my mom was, in the academia, and she'd actually studied economics in Sri Ram College of Commerce. And therefore, it was one of those things where I sort of wanted to match up and sort of follow, and have her as my role model. That's why I sort of chose economics and wanted to sort of be a master's and get it to the academia myself. Of course, life had other plans. And during my 3 years, while I did, I guess, reasonably well, I've realized that was not the path I want to pursue. So I went ahead and did my MBA, and the rest is history.
Yeah. So I think this is a very common theme. Yesterday, I recorded a podcast with another VC, and I asked her also, who is interested in finance at a very young age? So she also said that her mom was an investor, and then she just wanted to match up to her,
Yeah.
her mom. Were you interested in other things in terms of hobbies or anything else?
Growing up, I was a pretty studious kid. I think the theme remains. But yeah, so I wasn't too much into sports or fitness. I definitely liked art and sort of decor. So I did, even back in school, I did an interior designing course along with what I was doing at school. I was into craft and I used to paint. So that was always an area of interest. I think somewhere along the journey, I've picked up fitness pretty actively as well now as a part of my life, and, learning tennis, picked up kickboxing a few years ago, do strength training. So I think interests have evolved over the last few years. I'm a mom of two young boys. So that keeps me pretty busy and not enough time to be able to devote to all the interests. But hopefully one day be able to bring all of these myriad interests together.
Yeah. I could sense the interest in decor because you were obsessing about the back the background of the video before we started. Yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully my hope is, I guess my retirement plan one day would be, I'm a foodie, big foodie. I love art and decor, my house is full of art I've invested in. And at some point I'd like to open up some boutique sort of interior decor cafe or something like that. At least that's the hope in my retirement plan at the moment.
Cool. Yeah. So you've been a consultant and you work with Twitter, and then now you're with a VC firm. Yeah. Why did you take all these steps?
Sure. I guess, I've had a fairly non-linear career path, right? I've worked for the last 15 years, and I sort of look at my career in three broad phases, right? Like you said, started out my career in consulting, spent the first 7 years there between Accenture and then Boston Consulting Group, which is BCG, then moved on to be an operator. So I joined Twitter pretty early on while they were scaling up in Asia. This was just post their IPO, and sort of spent the next 7 years in a commercial leadership role. And then last but not the least, I think both of those journeys have now led me to the exciting world of VC, which is why you and I are talking. And I think there I'm able to sort of marry both my consulting and operator hat, right? And be able to add value to our founders and portfolio. Why I've had these pivots, I think it's been a pretty deliberate choice. And once it's happened to me, I think it's something that I fairly planned for. And, I think at a deep fundamental level, I'm someone who just craves to constantly learn and sort of broaden my horizon. Someone once told me pretty early on in my career, and that stuck to me, which is that in today's day and age, right, which is multifaceted, evolving so fast, the way you build your career is like a pyramid and not a tower. And essentially what that means is, instead of being a niche specialist, if you can build a pyramid of experiences, the wider the base of your pyramid is going to be. The more functional areas, for example, you've exposure to, you're able to then go up eventually as high, right? And I think that sort of stuck to me. And eventually, I think each of the decisions I made was sort of driven by getting closer to innovation, right? So I was in consulting, was working with the TMT, tech, media, telecom, and then felt like, hey, I wanted to truly, if I was advising them, might as well join and get closer to what the Silicon Valley tech ecosystem was doing. Social media at that point was very new. So joined Twitter. It's an incredible experience, scaling up that business. And then felt like the next wave of disruption was really coming from the startup ecosystem and wanted to get closer to that. And that's what led me to VC. Of course, I guess the B Capital team and what BCap was doing around just my role itself and operating roles, how they wanted to add value to our portfolio outside of just capital also pretty much appealed to me and felt like this was the right opportunity to go for.
Yeah. I mean, this is all going to be even more relevant, the advice that you are given what is happening in artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, like areas like, for example, content writing, right? Like they would fundamentally transform. And therefore, that's why I think if you're able to have a broad area of expertise, then hopefully, you're able to be relevant many more years down the line.
yeah.
At least
Yeah.
that was sort of the philosophy behind some of these moves that I've made.
And could you talk a little bit about B Capital? And the only thing that I know is that it was a fund started by Edward Saverin.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. Look, I mean, we're a pretty young fund. We were founded in 2015. We are a multi-stage investment firm, which means that we focus on seed to late stage venture growth investments. Like you pointed out, one of our co-founders is Eduardo, who's the co-founder of Facebook. We also have Raj Ganguly, who's based in LA. He's ex-Bain Capital. Howard Morgan, who founded First Round Capital. In this part of the world, Kabir Narang, who's our founding general partner. And we are sort of deep thematic investors. So we primarily invest in the B2B space. So we are doing investments in enterprise tech, fintech, health tech, as well as opportunistically B2B2C, as well as consumer enablement. And fundamentally, I guess as B Capital, a couple of things which have been, stood out to me, right? One, we truly believe in sort of building a global firm, right? So we want to marry the global investing experience with deep local network. So unlike a lot of other VCs, for example, we don't have a franchising model. We have a globally integrated team. We work across 9 locations in the US and Asia. And we believe that, tomorrow's groundbreaking companies are not just going to be built in the US or in Silicon Valley, but really in other parts of the world as well. Second, I think, is that you have a pretty strategic partnership with BCG. I'm happy to talk more about that, but essentially that allows us to provide value add support to our investors, investments, and essentially help our companies scale up fast, efficiently, build global businesses. And last but not the least, we have sort of built out an operating team, which is again very unique within the VC setup. Most times you would see operating teams within the private equity space, but we really believe in adding value and sort of working very closely with our founders, and that's part of what I do in my role. We've grown pretty significantly. So we started out with our first fund in 2016, $360 million. Today, we are about $6.3 billion in assets under management, more than 150 portfolio companies. So I've been on quite a hyperscaling journey ourselves. And within this part of the world, I guess I can mention to you some names of companies we've invested in. You may recognize some of those. In the SaaS space, for example, iCertis, More Engage. Within fintech, FAS, Khata Book, MSwipe, healthcare, PharmEasy, then within opportunistically in B2B2C, Caro, Bizongo, Blackback, Ninja Van, these are some examples of some of the investments we've done over the last few years.
Yeah. So you mentioned you have a unique operating approach. How so? As in almost all funds have like a support platform model, right? How is yours any different from other funds?
Sure. So I think first and foremost to me is just the genesis of how BCAP and our fund came about, right? Like essentially, if you look at the co-founders and our fund, we have, everyone came from a founding background and were essentially founders before they became investors. And I think that translates into just sort of the mission of how we invest, which is we've always had a goal to say we don't want to just provide capital, right? Beyond that, we want to operationally engage and really be the most value added investor on a company's cap table, right? And essentially actively partner with our founders across a variety of areas. So let me give you, a brief sense of how our operating team is set up. So on the operating side, we have sort of three broad functions. So we have strategy and operations, which I'm a part of. We have capital advisory and people advisory. So we essentially provide support across to our portfolio across strategic, capital, and people advisory initiatives. And beyond that, we also have a partnership with BCG. Now, let me give you a flavor of strategy and operations, right? Just to sort of bring it to life of what we do. Essentially, I end up leading strategy and ops for a large part of our Asia portfolio. And, in very simple speak, I think I see my role as just being able to make our founders and companies succeed. And we do that by partnering with them on both growth acceleration and operational improvements. Now, what does growth acceleration look like? That could be anything from developing GTM strategy. How do they prioritize which markets to enter? How do they do cross-border expansion? How do they think through operating planning? How do they structure their sales teams? What should they think about their channel partner strategy? What should pricing look like? Customer success. I mean, these are a bunch and variety of areas we worked with very closely with our portfolio. The second would be stuff like operation improvements, right? I mean, as you're scaling up, how do you set up for that success? That could mean within this environment, cash burn reduction or assessment, but also being able to sort of operationally set up your processes to be able to scale, whether that means how do you set up your process for account planning or onboarding, or sales incentive planning, right? Outside of that, outside of sort of GTM and operational improvements, we also end up focusing pretty actively on partnerships and sort of business development, right? What we want to do is sort of foster a pretty strong partner ecosystem to be able to bring true value to our portfolio, right? That could include stuff around tech integration, joint GTM. We build partnerships with SI companies, consulting partners, cloud hyperscalers. And essentially, all of these, the hope is that with all of these sort of areas that we are partnering with our founders and companies on, we're able to help them build and scale and create outsized returns and outcomes, for themselves in their categories. Let me pause there. I mean, that's just on the strategy and operations side. We also, like I said, have colleagues in capital advisory. These are typically people who come with deep experience in fundraising, banking. They'll help our companies with strategic financing, M&A, venture debt. How should they think about going to IPO? We have a people and org team as well, which does executive recruiting, organization excellence. So hope that just gives you a flavor of sort of all of the areas that we partner with our companies on. And yeah.
Okay. And you also mentioned seed to multi-stage. Why not just invest at a seed stage and then continue to invest on all the later stages? Well, why don't VC funds do that?
You mean to say that just invest in seed and then do follow-ons across the...
Yeah, I mean, so if you're a lead seed investor and the business is doing well and trying to raise Series A, be the lead investor in Series A, B, so on. The reason why I'm asking is then that would be like so then you're not trying to sell this thing to a Series B investor or anything, right?
Actually,
it would
that's
be on
what we do. So that's what we mean by being life cycle investors. So we have different funds that we are deploying out of. So we have our latest fund is a growth fund 3, that's $2.1 billion. There we are providing support and investments primarily from Series B through Series E. We have an Ascent fund where we are doing seed and Series A. We have an opportunities fund which does late sales Series E through pre-IPO. So we are pretty much investing across the life cycle. We want to, and we reserve capital to be able to follow on and be able to really double down on our investments and really want to provide, like you said, be a partner to our founders across that journey. And that's really how we are set up.
Yeah, you will not have a lot of companies in chasing growth for a sake of growth, right? You're not trying to sell to the next set of investors.
I mean, we want to have a long-term view to how we work with our portfolio and invest with our founders.
Yeah. And you also mentioned about the partnership, exclusive partnership with BCG. What does that bring to the table?
Sure. So, I mean, we were set up in a partnership with BCG right from the start. I'm ex BCG myself. And essentially, what we want to bring to our founders and our companies is really the access to the resources and network that BCG brings to the table, right? And if you look at the investment life cycle, BCG pretty much adds an incredible amount of value across each stage of the investment life cycle for us. I'll give you a flavor of some of the work we do with them. So pre-investment, this could be, investment thesis building, right? Being able to research and analyze some macro or micro trends in the areas of interest. For example, we've been doing some work with them on the climate tech space. They'll also sometimes help us with due diligence, right? To be able to really evaluate feasibility of the tech or product that we're investing in. So that's really on the pre-investment side. Post investment, we have some very interesting programs we set up with BCG. I think one is we have a tech startup advisor program, and that gives each and every company in our portfolio the ability to engage with BCG senior leaders and partners on an advisory basis, right? And they can bring in a very strategic guidance on the industry or function that is relevant to our portfolio, right? It could include anything from market entry strategies, pricing strategies, insights on the regulatory environment. I mean, just some examples of work on the Tech Startup Advisory Program. The second is really around business development. And that's where really the power of BCG and B Capital together. I mean, we think that we have one of the largest business development networks for B2B companies within this space. And as you can imagine, connecting startups to corporates can be pretty daunting, right? And especially for startups to be able to access some of these enterprise clients that they are going after, whether that's for partnership, whether that's for joint product integrations, whether that's for them being customers, is pretty tough. And BCG is really able to help bridge that gap and help our companies gain access to some of these large corporate leaders who are looking to partner with these emerging technologies. And that essentially helps you with business development and revenue acceleration. And that's been a pretty powerful sort of benefit that and unique thing that we're able to bring to the table through our BCG partnership. We also have, in certain cases, companies who want to engage with BCG more on the paid engagements side, right? Like more strategic, deep dive engagements. We're able to enable that. They can also help us with thinking through pre-IPO, M&As. So I think just the power of B Capital and BCG coming together, we feel has been hopefully, a unique differentiator and help our companies be able to scale up and go global.
Yeah. So, but what's in it for them, for BCG, for partnering with you guys?
So BCG, of course, one is an investor in B Capital, and beyond that, I mean, again, I think this is an area that they are looking to understand and learn and get deeper on, which is the startup ecosystem. Because if you look at most of BCG, their typical bread and butter would be the traditional industries. They're now getting very active in the growth tech side. They've built a practice called BCGX, which incubates ventures. So this remains a key area of interest for them. And through this, their clients, for example, also get access to some of these emerging technologies. They get a foot in the door. So I think it's really a win-win on both sides.
So, could you share with me like one instance where your advice and support around strategy and operation has helped one of your portfolio startups?
Sure. And give you a few examples. I think that would just help bring it to life. So this is primarily in the B2B space. So we've been working with one of our portfolio companies in the US expansion. And there's a variety of areas we've been helping them with. One is, I think what I talked about on the product market fit side, being able to understand how they position themselves versus their competitors within the US space, which is much more crowded. How do they sort of scale up their channel partnerships? Because that's going to be a key lever to growth on the enterprise side in the US, unlike the direct sales model that may work in some of the markets of India and Southeast Asia. We've also worked with another company around setting up, they were facing high churn and help them sort of set up what customer success looks like within the B2B marketplace space, which is somewhere between SaaS and a marketplace, right? And how could you customize customer success within that area? What are sort of the metrics to track? How do you set up everything from customer onboarding to retention strategies? And how do you sort of measure the impact through, for example, NPS, both on the customer and founder side? We also helped another company, think through the people organization side, right? And be able to say, how does the organization need to scale as their growth accelerates? What are sort of the some key areas that they need to overinvest in and hire for growth? Um, Last but not the least, we've also helped with BCG growth engagements, like I talked about, right? So in certain cases, BCGs come in, helped with, for example, sales acceleration. In certain verticals, helped identify use cases of what is the messaging that this company needs to go into, who are the key sort of ICPs that are going to be evaluating, and based on that, what does the narrative look like? How do you go and pitch to enterprise customers? What does sales excellence look like within that format? So yeah, so been a variety of examples of some very interesting work we've done over the last few years.
Yeah. The thing that you talked about, the expansion to US, I think you get that wrong, then you're finished. Especially if you're an early stage startup, right? You run out of resources and time.
Yeah.
You get that wrong. Yeah. And, how important is timing in all this? Like, in terms of advice on in preparing and getting it done early rather than,
I mean, we've not been doing this in the context of the current market environment. We've been doing this, you know,
yeah.
forever, right? And I think therefore to us it's always been think the next 3 to 5 years out and build that mid to long term path to what success looks like. Have a couple of scenarios while you do that planning because there's the best case and the eventual outcomes related to that, but there's also other cases that you need to look at based on certain variability of some of your growth scenarios, and based on that, you have to plan out what the right eventual outcomes look like. Yeah, so we've always brought that long term mindset, I hope, to the ecosystem and to our companies.
Okay. I guess what I was trying to ask is, let's say you see something through data or with engagement with one of your portfolio companies, and you can see that this is going to be a huge crisis
Yeah.
in maybe 6 months. So then you proactively look out for things like that.
Oh, yes,
And
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why we've sort of built this operating team as well, because many of us come from that operating background, have faced challenges, gone through business cycles while scaling up a business, and have lived through those and hopefully are able to see some of those trends early, pick up both what to do as well as equally important what not to do. And,
yeah,
be able to, in a constructive format, be able to share that with the companies and partner together to see how we can help.
yeah. And also, VCs as financiers, the advice is basically from the point of view of the shareholders, right? And keeping the shareholders' interest in mind. So, do founders really understand this? That's one thing. And second thing is like, is it always the right thing to do from a VC support perspective or advice perspective?
Sure. Look, I mean, our role is to be partners to our founders. Our role is not to run the business, and we're pretty clear on that, right? And therefore, while we are here to advise, at the end of the day, it's our founders who we've trusted and entrusted with both our capital as well as support to help our company scale. And we want to sort of play an enabling role versus a driving seat role. I think that's one thing I want to sort of lay out pretty well, right? The other is, I think in most of the opportunity, actually every opportunity that we would pick up to work on, it's typically something that we have, picked up as a joint team between the founders and us to say, A, this is a critical path item for the company, right? Or could be a critical choking block. Secondly, we have capability in this from our perspective, having worked on this area or through our partnership with BCG. I think only when both of those criteria are met would we pick up an opportunity. And therefore, it's always clear when we do that our incentives are aligned and we are really trying to see how we can essentially have an outsized impact, whether it's through the insights we bring, the network, or the access we bring to the table.
Yeah. I guess what I was trying to ask is like when there is like a very difficult scenario and it could be the need for layoffs or things like that, there is this conflict, especially if you're a founder, right? Because if you can't have a great team, then you don't have anything in terms of business and growing a business. But then you at the same time you also need to make sure that business survives, so there's a shareholder interest there as well. And it can be difficult for the founder, right? And then the VCs always talk keeping the shareholders' interest in mind rather than the team interest in mind. So the founder is in the middle, trying to balance both of these things. So
I would say the critical piece here is then timing, right? Because yes, both of these are important, but at the end of the day, I think it's all to us about, like I said, for us, we are not short-term investors. We are we are with the company through the long-term life cycle. So if there is an area that we feel like the company needs to invest in and needs to play the long-term game, whatever is needed to support that is important. We entrust our founders and know that they understand the business well and they're on top of some of these hard choices they need to make. I often say, like, I think right up with being a mother, I think being an entrepreneur is one of the most difficult roles you could play. And therefore, I feel like, our founders, we fully entrust them with some of those choices. And we don't want to sort of overplay one role versus the other.
yeah. And how do you measure success in your role?
Yeah. I think there's two ways to look at it, right? So I think one is more around how do you generate outsized returns for B capital, right? By being able to focus on some of these value add incentives and initiatives that we end up working on. I think that's more measurable. It's more short to mid-term. So that could be, for example, like I talked about on the growth acceleration side, any initiatives that we can run that have a direct top line impact, have a profitability impact, because that eventually leads to impacting the MOIC for us, the enterprise value of the company, and eventually what the IRR looks like for our funds, right? So I think that's more measurable as well as tangible in terms of impact. I think the other one, which is equally important, is how do we build a very differentiated reputation, right, as a firm by bringing these pretty unique capabilities to the table. And hopefully that can help us win competitive deals. This is not as short term or mid term focused, right? This is more long term focused. But hopefully, through all the work that we do, we are able to generate strong founder NPS and goodwill. And our founders recommend us to other entrepreneurs when they are looking to grow and look for capital, right? And hopefully that helps us win competitive deals, be able to get preferential terms or saying those are sort of some of the more intangible but equally valuable impact that we can have from an operating and platform team perspective.
How can startups minimize poor decisions, in your opinion, especially when there is like a very tough environment like we are
Yeah.
facing now?
Look, again, I think what I call on like massive respect for people who are trying to do this and our founders. And within the context of the current market environment, right? I think the conversation, as we all know, has moved a lot towards efficiency, right? So whether it's sales efficiency, whether it's capital efficiency, it's no longer about growth, but really how do you get that growth, right? And from our perspective, we feel like this is something we've always looked for. We've looked for companies that have high customer loyalty. We've looked for companies sort of who are building for the long term. I think the one fact to keep in mind, right, like the current market environment sometimes can feel fairly grim, but the one fact to keep in mind is it's very interesting. BCG did this research where they looked at past downturns, right? And what they saw was that during these moments of what we see as adversity are when really strong businesses pull ahead, right? And
Yeah.
almost 14% of the companies that they surveyed and sort of looked at improved both growth and margins during these times, right? So it is, while it's a tough time, it's also an incredible time to be able to build. I think what do you need to do though to be able to do that, right? I think couple, how do you just not survive but thrive, right? Like couple of areas that I think are important. I think one, I think we've been all talking a lot about cash burn management, right? And most of the times it's been like cash burn management at a line item level, right? Like look at and disaggregate each item basically on your income statement and be able to say where can we cut down and can we cut cloud costs or can we optimize some of our vendors, etc. I think equally important is to actually look at a portfolio approach to your business, right? If you look at your business, there is a core business, there is a core adjacency, and then there's probably these emerging bets. And over the last few years, as growth came about and as capital was more freely available, a lot of companies invested in some of these emerging bets. I think this is a good time to be able to really relook your business holistically and be able to ruthlessly prioritize and say, okay, I'm going to invest in this core market or core business or core product. Maybe I'm going to expand into these adjacencies, but there are certain probably emerging bets or core non-adjacent businesses that I may need to close, may need to sell, may need to be able to reevaluate my investment in those. So I think that's one. I think second is just be able to sort of prioritize and do that scenario planning exercise, right? I think that's not often done, but you truly need to at this point stress test your business model given the variability in the environment, right? And be able to forecast across a range of both growth and investment scenarios and track what are the leading indicators that indicate where you are within that scenario planning matrix. I think last but not the least, I think is around exit, right? Because as we know, across the ecosystem, IPO windows seem pretty closed, at least till late 2023, maybe 2024. And therefore, how do you think about fundraising? And one of my colleagues told me this on the capital advisory side, which is that one of the most important rules of fundraising is to raise capital when you can and not when you're forced to. So, therefore, one of our advice to our companies has been when your cash runways are healthy, especially because we are seeing that fundraising can take sometimes long, go ahead and think through what your fundraising strategy looks like. Go and look at alternatives beyond IPO. That could include stuff around strategic partnerships, right? There are a lot of large corporates sitting on trillions of dollars of cash, and corporate M&A is a true alternative to not every company needs to go through that IPO process, right? And just being able to holistically and reevaluate what your path looks like to the next level of outcome is the other one that we have been sort of advising to our companies.
Yeah, it's already a good time to build if you have a strong fundamentals, because it's going to be the upturn in
Absolutely.
future, and then you ride that wave.
Yeah. And I mean, the competitive context, there may be other competitors who may not be on a level playing
Survive.
field. Yeah. And therefore, if you're able to really have that offensive play in certain areas, that would absolutely be the right strategy.
Yeah. So, do you want to continue to be a VC for the rest of your career, and also specifically in Asia?
Look, I definitely want to be in Asia. I think that's pretty clear. And typically, I've done each of my careers for 7 years. I've done consulting for 7 years and then an operator hat for 7 years. So I'm hoping at least I am definitely wanting to be in this ecosystem and learn as much as I can and be able to contribute. I'm very bullish on Asia. I've been in Singapore for the last 9 years, of course, grown up in India. And really, if you look at some of the strong growth fundamentals and secular tailwinds we are seeing in the region, right? Both on the consumer side, where you're seeing a market like India, which is going to be soon a 5 trillion economy, going to be one of the top 5 economies in the world. Indonesia as well is on a similar trajectory. Also on the business side, right? Not just on the consumer side, you're seeing, you know, traditional businesses really take up digitization, right? For example, I think UPI has fundamentally rechanged, right? How some of the SMEs in India interact and sort of accept payments. And, so some of these sort of areas that we are seeing, Asia sort of become strong on is incredible. And I think Asia is now not just a consumption economy, but really an innovation economy, right? You're seeing new category creation happening within this part of the world. So I remain very, very excited about Asia and the tech ecosystem and hope to sort of be able to contribute to it in any way I can.
Yeah, that's a good note to end. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Awesome. That was lovely. Thanks, Rahul.